Good evening. We'll move on with the second part of the evening. The first part of the evening was devoted to the business meeting and the election of the new board. And the second part is devoted to, as we previously mentioned, protecting our community, especially protecting our youth. And in that regard, we have two very important presentations. We potentially have third one, but I think we need to make at least two formal presentations. But before we make the formal presentations, I would like to recognize the U.S. Attorney, Mr. Bill Hochul, who was instrumental in making it possible for us to be able to put this panel together, whereby we can address some of the critical issues that are facing the community in terms of youth protections. And Bill, would you like to say a couple of words?
Thank you, Dr. Kazi, and salam alaikum. It's great to be here. Let me also issue or be the first to congratulate the new leadership. I've been fortunate to work with Dr. Kazi going on probably 12 years. I think I first met Khaled in 2004. And over those years, he's had a variety of leadership positions, but it's also nice to be here when the new leaders are officially beginning their term, their 2-year term, I understand. And I very much look forward to working with the leaders for the next 2 years. As Dr. Kazi began, though, this is a very important day for us. I say us collectively. Certainly, there is threats to our youth that include bullying in the real world or in the school place or in the neighborhoods, but there's also online threats that are being posed to an extent like never before. And it seems like all you have to do is pick up a paper or watch the television for you to know that those online threats have succeeded in hurting our young people in a wide variety of ways. Today's programs are going to be presented to you by two experts in the field. Dr. Amanda Nickerson is a very distinguished professor at the State University of New York at Buffalo, and she has devoted her professional life to combating bullying in the real world, in our neighborhoods. I'm sure she also has familiarity with online bullying, cyberbullying, and the like. Our next speaker is going to be from the Federal Bureau of Investigations. That's Mike Tapin. Mike spent a very distinguished career in federal law enforcement in a role which has taken him throughout the world, and he lived for several years in Saudi Arabia. So he brings a very wide breadth of experience when it comes to the threats posed to our community from abroad as well as in the virtual world. Let me just conclude before we turn it back over to Dr. Kazi by saying this. My pledge is the same as my requirement in serving as your United States Attorney. The pledge is to uphold the Constitution of the United States and to keep everybody in this room safe from violence of all types. I've been very fortunate to be coming before you as United States Attorney for 6 years now. And God willing, I will continue to do it for the foreseeable future. But one thing that I can say to you over those 6 years as United States Attorney, and before that, more than 20 years as an assistant United States Attorney, is that law enforcement can't do it alone. Law enforcement needs the help of the community in order to keep everybody safe. And there's a great number of reasons for that. One is that police can't be everywhere at the same time. It's the eyes and ears of the public that are essential for telling us what's going on and where we should be deploying our resources to protect the public. That's reason one. But reason two is that there's limitations in government there's limitations that are posed when some of the ways that our children are being threatened are in the language of certain protected constitutional activities. And for that, it's only the public that once again can help us engage and keep the public safe. We can present information, but at the end of the day, we don't want to lock people up if we can help it. We would much rather live in a peaceful world that doesn't require police officers on every street corner, and certainly we wouldn't have the ability to do that even if we had the financial resources to do so. So whereas I think things here in Western New York are tremendously safe, we are very fortunate to live in a wonderful community, the City of Good Neighbors. It's still not perfect, and I think after today's program, we will be getting closer to the ideal place of an ever better community, Western New York, City of Good Neighbors, the public working hand in hand with law enforcement to make sure that our children and our people of all ages, frankly, men, women, young, old, they are safe, they are secure, and they can all excel in Buffalo and help make Buffalo and Western New York the best it's ever been. Thank you very much, and with that, I turn it back to Dr. Khaled Kazi.
Thank you very much, Bill, for those comments. I don't want to interpose myself between you and the speaker, so without further ado, I'll invite the first speaker, Amanda Nickerson. Well, she's coming up, just to let you know, she's very highly recommended for you to listen carefully what she has to say. She's academically very oriented with over 5-6 dozen publications and hundreds of presentations, and I'm sure you will really come out with this presentation knowing what school bullying is all about. And then after her, we have one more presentation, and then we'll have an informal conversation by way of questions and interaction with you. So we will not be done purely by her formal presentation. You'll have the opportunity to interact a little more after that. Amanda?
Thank you. And you want to save questions till after both presentations? Okay. Thank you so much for having me here this evening to talk about this very important issue of bullying. I'm only going to be speaking for about 20 minutes, which for a professor is almost impossible, but I will try to limit it to that and try to get you as much information as possible. So what I'm planning to do is tell you what bullying is. We all probably have ideas about what it is, but I'm going to go over the actual definition that we use. Tell you some of the warning signs to look for bullying, and I'm going to be focusing on bullying in children and adolescents. And then importantly, what can we do? I know that I was asked to do a focus on the school, so I'm going to tell you about the legislation in New York State if you're not already aware of it, but then bring it back to what each of us as citizens, as parents, as community members can be doing more informally about the problem. So bullying has been defined by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which I think is an important thing that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention actually have a formal definition of this. They're recognizing this as a very important issue in our country. And they define it as unwanted aggressive behavior by a youth or a group of youths who are doing, where it includes an observed or perceived imbalance of power. And that power can come from someone being physically weaker, someone being from an ethnic minority group, someone practicing a religion that is not as in the majority, someone having a different sexual orientation or a disability. So there's many, many ways that that power imbalance can happen, but it is important that it's there. And it's something that's usually repeated over and over, or there's a high likelihood that it's going to be repeated. And we know that bullying can inflict harm or distress on the targeted youth, and that can have social implications, educational implications, and psychological implications. So bullying comes in many different forms. It can be physical, it can be punching, hitting, things like that. It can certainly be verbal, threatening remarks, racial slurs. It can also be indirect or relational. So this is kind of going behind other people's backs, spreading rumors, excluding them. So maybe not doing it to the person, but doing it through others. And then, of course, cyberbullying, which is taking it to online, on the phone, through text messaging, through social media to do this kind of harm as well. Sometimes we get bullying confused with other things. It's not simple teasing. Teasing is when you kind of say something to somebody else. It may hurt their feelings, but you're trying to get them to laugh, and they might say something right back to you. That happens a lot with kids, and that's not bullying. And then conflict is a struggle, a dispute, a misunderstanding, but someone's not intentionally trying to aggress on somebody else. So I think it's kind of important to distinguish those things, because when we're working with kids, we see a lot of teasing and a lot of conflict, and not all of it is bullying. So why does it happen? There are many, many reasons. I just have some of the key words up here. One, the basic thing is it's an abuse of power. It's that someone or a group of people are using their position of superiority, often trying to keep their social status. They may feel threatened by others. They may be intolerant. But there's a lot of other things that feed into it. We know that kids often see it happening. They see bullying happening about 80% of the time. But it's only about 10% of the time that someone will step in and try to do something about it. And the same is true with adults. And adults often don't see it. Usually bullying is happening. The bullies are smart enough to know not to do it in the presence of adults. So it's part of the reason why it keeps happening. And there's also kind of this code of silence. A lot of people that are bullied don't want to tell other people because of shame or because they think it's going to make it worse or they're going to be more targeted. So why is it even a problem? We know that 1 in 3 youth have been involved as either a bully, a victim, or both. And I think it's important for us to realize that someone can be both. They can bully somebody else and they can also be bullied. And we know that it's harmful. We know that people that are bullied have lower self-esteem. They want to avoid school or social situations. They might be depressed. They might have suicidal thoughts and/or attempts. Also, people who bully others are not doing well either for the most part. They may have school problems, relationship problems, and other kinds of aggressive or risk-taking behavior. They're also more likely to have criminal problems when they get older. So what do you want to look for? I'm going to tell you about some possible signs that a child or adolescent may be bullying others. But if you know someone who has some of these characteristics, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're bullying, but it's just something to look out for. So many people who bully will use derogative terms towards others, call somebody else a wimp, a loser, some other degrading term. They lack empathy. They're not able to see the effect or the impact of their behavior on others and feel bad about it. They also tend to have a strong need to be right, to get their own way. They may be really competitive or intolerant. They may be hostile or defiant, get angry really easily. And when their behavior is addressed, their most common response is to deny it or to blame somebody else. What do we look for in terms of the signs that someone might be bullied? We look for unexplained illnesses or ailments or cuts or bruises. Those are kind of some obvious physical signs. Not wanting to go to school or be in social situations often happens. People will go through great pains to try to avoid where that's happening. And then we want to look for any change in behavior. You know, someone that, if our child was interested in doing things and then doesn't want to do them anymore, if they become more withdrawn or their friend group changes suddenly, it could be that it's bullying. The problem with these kind of things to look for is they could be signs of a lot of other things too. They could be signs of other kinds of abuse. They could be signs of depression or drug or alcohol use. But I think the important thing is if you see signs like this, it's something to ask more about, to be more on the lookout about. Okay, so importantly, what can we do? So I wanted to let you know, if you didn't already, about the Dignity for All Students Act. Is anybody familiar with the Dignity for All Students Act? A couple people, okay. So this is a law that was passed, or that went into effect July 1st, 2012, and then it was amended in 2013 to include cyberbullying as well. But really the intent of the law is to provide all students in New York State in public elementary and secondary schools with a safe and supportive atmosphere that's free from discrimination, bullying, harassment. It's not an anti-bullying law, it's an anti-harassment and discrimination law, and bullying is included under that. There is no federal law about bullying in schools, but 49 of the 50 states do have state laws, and New York is one of them. So there are 11 protected classes that are outlined, that are specified in the Dignity for All Students Act. You can see them up here: race, color, weight, national origin, ethnic group, religion, religious practice, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex. It's one of the more inclusive laws in terms of state laws in protected classes. So what does it include? The first thing is that every school in New York State needs to have a policy saying that harassment, bullying, discrimination by students or by school employees is not to be tolerated and is not accepted. There is also staff training, in-service staff training, plus more recently, anybody that's going to become certified to work for schools in New York State has to go through 6 hours of training, not only about the law, but about bias, discrimination, protected classes, and how to prevent and intervene with bullying and harassment. There's also instructions to students in terms of civility and character. New York State already had character education, so this is supposed to be infused within that to really teach students about the importance of accepting others and not bullying and harassing. Important for you to know too, and not everybody does, is that each school is required to have a Dignity Act coordinator. So if you suspect that your child is being bullied or harassed, you should ask, who is the Dignity Act coordinator? Because that is the person that is responsible for overseeing that the school is doing what they should be doing and that reports can go to. So every school should have one. If you ask and someone doesn't know who they are, just ask more people, because it is a requirement. Each school has to annually report, and each district, the material incidents of harassment, and that information is publicly available on the New York State Ed website. I will say that, and I've been quoted saying this, I think it's vastly underreported. A lot of schools say that there's 0 incidents. And there's just no way that could happen. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that underreporting, but it is definitely a problem. So that's what's happening legislatively and what the schools are supposed to be doing to address this. We've done some research in my center and at UB about the impact of the Dignity for All Students Act. And in a nutshell, what we found is that schools that are more compliant with the aspects of the Dignity for All Students Act have better school climates, have bullying is less of a problem, and they perceive that there's less that they really need to do. However, we looked at this before the Dignity Act was implemented and after, and we found no difference due to time. So schools that were doing these things, whether it was before or after the Dignity Act, it was more that they were doing these things, not that the law itself made a difference. So I think the bottom line, the takeaway for me is that these are some of the things that we should be doing, and schools that are doing it are better off, but it may or may not be the legislation that's really responsible for it. And we still have a long way to go. So bringing it back to our community and to us as individuals, what can we do? Educating ourselves, doing things like being here. We have a lot of resources on our website at the Alberti Center for Bullying Abuse Prevention. There's books, there's videos, there's handouts that just having the conversations about not only bullying, but inclusion and differences and what it feels like to be left out of something. I mean, I think we have to acknowledge that bullying is something that happens frequently. We cannot suspend and expel, nor do I think we should, every child who is bullying. So we've got to be teaching kids how to protect themselves, how to help other people, how to not engage in this behavior in the first place. And it's a process. It's not just going to happen overnight, but it needs to start by talking about it. So I also just have some tips, and I tried to keep this general because I know we have parents here, we have students, so it's kind of hard to do a talk that's going to meet everybody's needs. But if you are bullied, I think it really depends on the situation and your comfort, how you react. I do not subscribe to saying every kid needs to do exactly this, because a lot of the circumstances will dictate what's safe and comfortable to do. The best thing is to report it to a trusted adult. And I say a trusted adult because just reporting it to an adult, it might not be someone who's going to do the right thing about it. So it's a safe person, someone that we can depend on. Staying close to friends and trusted peers and adults is also really important to prevent it from happening, but to also get support if it is happening. And then some more kind of on the spot kind of reactions. Unfortunately, if people who are bullied show that it has an effect on them, if they cry, if they act upset, if they say don't do that, that's exactly what the person bullying wants. So even though we tell kids it's okay to be upset about this and you shouldn't be treated like this, you don't want to show your vulnerability in the moment because it could make it worse. So we want to teach people to be assertive, to stand up straight, to look someone in the eye, to say, stop, that's not okay. That's harassment. You can't say that to me. Sometimes the person doing it really doesn't know, and then if someone is able to assertively say, I don't want that, first, it's sending a very assertive message, and second, if the person continues, then you have even more evidence to say this really was bullying because it was clear that I did not want that to go on and it was still happening. The other recommendation, some people like this, some people don't, is to say something to deflect it or make a joke out of it or educate somebody about it to kind of lighten the mood and make it not as big of a deal. Again, I'm not saying that these strategies will work for everybody, but depending on the comfort and the situation, these things might work. For preventing cyberbullying, it starts with really, for all of us, not just kids, but being a good digital citizen. So I say to kids, only communicate with things online that you'd be okay about your grandparents seeing, your future bosses seeing, because they may. Anything is permanent that's on the web. Follow the rules. We have the Children's Internet Protection and Privacy that children under the age of 13 should not be sharing private information. They shouldn't have social media accounts where they have identifying information. And if they do, then either they've lied and said that they're older or their parents have. Be aware of anonymous sites. I don't know how many people are familiar with Spring Me. It used to be Formspring. There's a lot of anonymous sites, but they tend to be the most brutal. I've never met anybody, a kid or an adult, that was glad that they were on it, because it ends up being a forum for people to really just bash and harass other people. So I don't know why we need anonymous sites, quite honestly. Don't share passwords with other people, except for kids. Share them with your parents. Your parents should know. But if you have a best friend, if you have a boyfriend or girlfriend, don't give them your password, because they could use it and pretend to be you or do something else. And use the off switch. I mean, not responding to upsetting communications is really the best thing we can do, and taking some time to just disconnect from those electronics is really important too. So parents, I think we have to acknowledge that some of us might have kids that are bullying others. And good for you if you're willing to see that and acknowledge that. It's a hard thing to see, but it is something that happens. The first thing we want to do is try to figure out why that's happening. Have they gotten in with a group that says that this is a really good thing to do and they're following along? Have they been bullied or victimized themselves and they're doing this to lash out or retaliate? And then you want to work with the school and with the community, with community professionals, to try to make some change, to try to use that desire for power to develop alternative behaviors that are better for them, that are going to show their leadership in more positive ways that don't involve bullying others. Absolutely holding the child accountable, saying this is not acceptable. These are the consequences, being really firm about that, and sending the clear, firm, and supportive message that the behavior is not okay, it needs to change, and you're going to be looking at that and following up on it. If your child is being bullied, I know the first thing we always want to do is take action. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but you need to understand that if you talk to kids who have been bullied, they want someone that's going to listen to them. The best thing that we can do for them is let them know that we hear them, that we believe them, that we're not blaming them, and what do they want us to do? So thanking them for telling us, because most people don't. Taking it seriously, being empathic, tell me what happened, that sounds really scary, that sounds really upsetting, and find out more about what happened, and problem solve. Parents that say, just hit him back, why don't you just ignore it, what did you do in the first place? Those aren't helpful responses. Absolutely work with the school and with outside professionals if needed. You want to document what happened, absolutely, and your follow-up with the school, and you want to follow up to see what's being done, what's happening. And finally, if you see someone else being bullied, this is more for children and adolescents, but it really should be for all of us. I hope if there's one thing that you take away is that most of us that see something like this happening don't do anything, and then we become part of the problem. So what we try to say to kids is, if you see it, don't join in. There may be that tendency, but don't do it, and stand up to it if you feel safe doing that. Sometimes it's better if you can band together with other people to say this isn't okay, there's power in numbers, and report the bullying. There's a huge issue with tattling and ratting, but we try to educate kids. The difference between telling or reporting is this is trying to get somebody out of trouble. This is trying to help somebody. Tattling or ratting is when you're simply just trying to get somebody in trouble with something that really isn't your business, as opposed to really trying to help somebody else that's in need. And then finally, and I feel like I keep saying it, but reaching out and offering support. Can't tell you how many people I've worked with that have just said, if I just knew that somebody cared, that somebody knew what was happening to me, didn't want it to happen to me, whether or not they could actually stop it, because it's a hard thing to stop, just knowing I wasn't alone made it so much easier and made such a difference for me. And I could go on stories for hours, but I won't, because I actually think I kept to my 20 minutes. So I really thank you for your attention and interest. I can take a couple questions now. Separate training. Okay, the question is, she works in schools and sees that there is like training for kids about bullying, but what about cyberbullying? What are schools doing for that? You know, there is no one curriculum that every school is using. I know a lot of schools look at NetSmarts, which is like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Others look at Common Sense Media. Some of them have them within their different health and communication classes where they'll have modules for kids talking to them about it. So I think there's a lot of resources out there, but I think it really varies by school what they're using and how much the kids are getting with it.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Just to reinforce one area which personally as a community worker I have found to be totally lacking on part of our community, and that is documentation. Part of the reason for continuation of bullying is that the parents and the students themselves have not been able to document this in a linear fashion, in a continuous fashion. So my advice to us all is that if you come across either your own yourself or your children of any incident or episode of bullying, please start documenting it right from the beginning. Make sure you write down what day it was, what time it was, who did where, when, and exactly what. And that must be cataloged day in and day out. Don't think that it does not make any sense. It was the same thing as yesterday. It makes every sense to make sure you document every single incident. This becomes all the more important if there is a police case, which also is the case in the community currently. So if you cannot document, remember this, if you cannot document, it did not happen. If you cannot document, it did not happen. You got to have an awful lot of witnesses, which in this case, the witnesses are not coming forth all the time. Therefore, all the details that you will have is what is going to strengthen the case. So please keep that in mind. With that, I'll have the pleasure to introduce our next speaker, which Mr. Hochul already introduced, Mike Tapin. And Mike, please go ahead, and we'll hear a lot more about cyberspace.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kazi. Assalamu alaikum. Mes al khair. It's me, Michael Tapin. I've been in the FBI for about 15 years. I have met many of you tonight, and first and foremost, I want to thank you for having me here. It is always a pleasure. In my 15-year FBI career, I have spent an incredible amount of time in the Middle East. I lived in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia from 2013 to 2015. I've been traveling throughout the Middle East to include Palestine, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman. Some of my best and dearest friends are from the Arab Peninsula, And just coming in here tonight really brought back some fond memories of my time in Saudi Arabia. So once again, thank you. The reason I'm here is the title of our presentation. It's Protect Our Community. And whenever I do things like this, I want to elicit comments from the community. I want to foster dialogue because I really believe that's the best way in which we can solve a problem. And I've done this 3 or 4 times already, and it has been a phenomenal experience to interact with the Muslim community here in Buffalo. So before we actually start the PowerPoint presentation, I want to go over 2 main terms that are going to be constant themes in tonight's presentation. First term, radicalization. Second term, mobilization. And I'm going to read off a definition of radicalization. Radicalization refers to the process by which individuals come to accept a violent extremist narrative and conclude that non-state violence and their participation in it is necessary and justified to effect political or societal change. That can be anybody from the Ku Klux Klan to the domestic terrorists who are in Oregon right now, or anybody espousing violence to effect political or societal change. So we've got radicalization on one hand. We've got mobilization on the other hand. Mobilization, and I'll read the definition, is the process which refers to the process by which radicalized individuals take action to prepare for or engage in violence or material support for violence to advance their cause. So you've got radicalization, and then you've got mobilization. Radicalization isn't against the law. Oftentimes that's free speech. Where myself, the FBI, and law enforcement and the U.S. attorneys get involved is mobilization. When that radical individual becomes mobile and takes action to provide material support or commit an act of terror. So I want to remember those 2 terms. The key point here with those 2 terms and why we're all here is the importance of bystanders in the community in the prevention of all forms of criminal and ideological-driven violent acts, affecting everything from preventing bullying and gang violence to preventive recruitment by violent extremists. Here's a quick stat. Related to homegrown violent extremism, in more than 80% of the cases that we have examined, people in the community knew that there was something going on. In less than 50% of those cases did somebody actually report it. That's a problem. We as a community have to get better. The main point, and this is again why we're here, communities are invaluable partners in preventing and intervention. We can't do it without you. Finally, before we start, radicalization is not a linear process. It involves the interplay of multiple disciplines. It involves the interplay of personal, group, community, sociopolitical, and ideological factors. There's no one single factor that accounts for why one person radicalizes and mobilizes. You can't put them into a box. It just doesn't happen. You can't say why one person joins the Ku Klux Klan, one person joins a domestic terror group, or why a person joins ISIS. There are many, many factors. Okay, ISIS goes viral. This is a quote from the FBI director. It's a problem anywhere there are troubled souls with access to the internet. And our main theme tonight is going to be ISIS because they're our #1 threat in the United States, and they have an extensive media and internet presence. ISIS's extensive media network of central and provincial media outlets have released over 6,000 media products since 2015. They leverage Twitter followers, which spread by a robust network throughout the entire world and to online sympathizers. ISIS has 5 flagship media offices. The Al-Furqan publishes Western hostage videos. The Al-Hayat, which you'll see a video of very quickly, publishes non-Arabic language media productions. I don't know if you've heard of Depew magazine, but Al-Hayat produces that. There are 36 provincial media offices run by ISIS, and that's prevalent in Syria and Iraq, North Africa, the Gulf countries, the Northern Caucasus, and Afghanistan and Pakistan. How many young people do we have here? Let's say young people under the age of 25. Can you raise your hands? Fantastic. We have a phenomenal, diverse representation here. All right, if you're over the age of 35, raise your hand. Okay, fantastic. Now, for those under 20, actually, let's go to those over 25, over 35. Do you know what SureSpot is? Do you know what Wicker is? Do you know what Kik is? Do you know what WhatsApp is? Okay, everybody knows WhatsApp. All right, good. These are the media platforms that ISIS is using. And if you're older and you're a parent, you got to understand the internet. You have to understand social media because you have to understand what your kids are looking at. It's vital. You've got to know what they're looking at. And it doesn't matter, Amanda brought up a very good point with bullying. You have to know what sites your kids are on. There's a couple up here that I didn't put on the presentation, but I want to note. Twitter is by and far ISIL's favored platform for disseminating propaganda. YouTube takes advantage of newer, sleeker technological equipment to produce very high quality videos, and you're going to see one here shortly. Instagram, Tumblr, and Ask.fm are all sites that ISIS uses. Ask.fm is an anonymous question and answer site. So once again, if you're older and you've got kids, you have to start your education into social media and the internet. Young kids, help your old parents out. That'll be very helpful to them. ISIL has foreign members who operate on social media to build out networks of foreign recruits. And you're going to see a very good video here shortly. But ISIL is brilliant. They understand their audience. The large volumes of their media depicts children in schools and amusement parks in very, very good settings. And again, you have to imagine worldwide, they can touch youth worldwide. They can touch that 17-year-old troubled soul who's sitting in his basement in California or in Buffalo or in Peoria, Illinois. So if we can play, yeah, there it is. Before we hit it, this is about a 6-minute video. Normally I don't like having videos this long, but I want you to understand this is 6 minutes. Look at the production, look at the education level, and look what they're trying to do. Because again, if you're a 16-year-old kid and you're troubled, this is going to be very appealing to you.
أيها الذين آمنوا استجيبوا لله وللرسول إذا دعاكم لما يحييكم. O you who believe, answer the call of Allah and His Messenger when He calls you to what gives you life. Imam al-Qurtubi says that what gives you life is jihad. I know by Allah that this is the land of jihad and the land of hayat, the land of living. We have brothers from Bangladesh, from Iraq, from Cambodia, Australia, UK. Nothing has gathered us except to make Allah Azza wa Jalla word the highest. That's all we've came for. And when you want to know who is upon the haqq, my brothers and sisters, you need to look to the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says the land of Sham is the best of lands from Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah Azza wa Jal has astafaha. He has made this the best of His lands, and He chooses the best of people to come here. So you see where the muhajirin are, and this is the biggest evidence that they are upon the haqq. And walillahi alhamd, I don't know anybody else that has as many muhajirin as we do. We have people from all over the world, walillahi alhamd. And also about the issue of, subhanallah, fighting to make Allah's word the highest. A lot of people think it's just to put this flag over their building. By Allah, it's not that. It's implementing the law of Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah Azza wa Jal, the Quran tells us to fight until there is no fitna. And when you look at what the meaning of fitna is, the majority of the mufassirin explain it specifically to be shirk. And by Allah, other than implementing the law of Allah Azza wa Jal and fighting the enemies of Allah, you see no one who does it like us, walillahi alhamd. And we are a state who is implementing the Sharia in both Iraq and Sham. And look at the soldiers. We understand no borders. Walillahi alhamd, we have participated in battles in Sham, and we will go to Iraq in a few days and we will fight there bi'idhnillah and come back. And we will even go to Jordan and Lebanon with no problems, wherever our Sheikh wants to send us. And again, I want to send a message to my Sheikh, our Sheikh Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, Amir al-Mu'mineen. I send you this message, and I want to let you know that the hope of this ummah is in your neck. By Allah, the hope of this ummah is in your neck. I say the third time, the hope of this ummah is in your neck. We hope in the khilafah. It's imminent, whether it's by us or those after us. But we know it will be imminent. And by Allah, I speak to you from the heart, bi'idhnillah azza wa jal, and I want to let you know, don't fear the blame of the blamers, and be firm, and don't change at all. And bi'idhnillah azza wa jal, we are with you. Send us, we are your sharp arrows. Throw us at your enemies wherever they may be. And bi'idhnillah azza wa jal, we will return the borders which goes all the way to Al-Andalus and Al-Jazeera bi'idhnillah azza wa jal.
نحن فرسان الحياة يا أسود الله شد الرحال لأرض الشام والفرات.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل وسلم على نبينا محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. First thing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Iqra. Ya all brothers and sisters, open the Quran and read the ayahs of Quran. Read the ayahs of jihad, then everything will become clear to you. With me, in the UK, when I used to read the ayahs of Quran, I used to feel like a munafiq. You know, when I used to read the ayahs of jihad, because I wasn't doing it, I feel like a munafiq. And this is what really made everything clear to me. All these scholars telling you, oh, this is farz, this is not farz, it's not time to do jihad. Forget everyone. Read the Quran, read the book of Allah, the instruction of life, and you'll find out what is jihad, and if we meant to do jihad or not. All you brothers, wallah, make a move. Because Allah does not need you to fight for Him. You need to fight for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for your akhirah. Dawla doesn't need you, doesn't need your money, but you need to spend on dawla for your akhirah. This dunya is only a test. And Allah sent you to this dunya to see how much you're willing to sacrifice for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Are you willing to sacrifice the fat job you've got, the big car you've got, and the family you have? Are you willing to sacrifice this for the sake of Allah? Definitely, if you sacrifice something for Allah, Allah will give you 700 times more than this. Oh my brothers, living in the West, I know how you feel when I used to live there. In the heart, you feel depressed. Prophet ﷺ said, the cure for the depression is jihad fi sabilillah. You feel like you have no honor. Prophet ﷺ said, the honor of a believer is qiyamul layl. The honor of the ummah is jihad fi sabilillah. Oh my brothers, come to jihad and feel the honor we are feeling. Feel the happiness that we are feeling.
Okay. Very powerful. Tell me some of the things that you saw with that video. Anybody? How? Yes, sir.
Very well educated person.
Very, very well educated. Phenomenal. Yes, sir.
Misunderstand. He didn't understand the Quran. He's talking from his mind, his feeling, his own feeling, not the reality of Quran.
Yes, I agree. Absolutely. Yes, sir, in the back. Youth, exactly. What do you think? These guys are 21, 22-year-olds. Very good for propaganda. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
One thing that was really amazing is the fact that he was sitting and acting like a very Quranic, like sheikh person, and it was like getting my heart.
Absolutely, I agree. And they are masters. This was masterful. Notice where they're sitting. I don't know exactly where they're sitting, but it's lush, it's green, it's beautiful. They look like they're well fed, they're well rested, everything is good. Come, join. What else? Yes, sir.
You said their ability to communicate and get the message out.
Absolutely.
In a language that's understood.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm sorry? Very, very diverse. And we're going to expand on that in a little bit. Yes, sir, in the back.
I think the message was very specific to the kids who were sitting in their own home and depressed about their environment.
100%. That is a perfect observation, and that's the main thing that I wanted to point out. They're looking for these young 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old depressed kids. Everybody. I know I did when I was 20, 21. What I did is I joined the Marine Corps. They're looking for that same sense of adventure and that same sense that every one of us as a young kid has. You want to answer to a higher calling, and that's what they're selling. That's a tough thing to combat. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just to add to that, they're trying to connect and relate to the youth and telling them that they were in their shoes and telling them that the kids that are struggling, that this is the way out, that this is what they're meant to do, and this is what's going to end their misery, and they're going to be really happy, and they look, very honorable and proud and happy, and like I said, they're just trying to put themselves in their shoes, saying, we were just like you a few years ago, now look at us. So relating to them.
Absolutely, and it's brilliant. What a brilliant propaganda campaign. All of the things that you all are seeing and discussing right now, you're spot on, but they are brilliant. The quality of the video is brilliant. The production, the direction, and the psychology that went into it is incredible. Very tough to combat. Yes, sir.
Yeah, it gives you the feeling of belonging to a group or to identity instead of being isolated by yourself, So kids want to belong to something.
Absolutely, 100%. And a lot of times, a lot of kids, they don't feel like they belong. And the social media networks and the internet give those kids that sense of belonging. And they see a video like that, and they want to join. And kids are joining all around the world. And we'll go into some detail. So, we just saw the video. More than 32,000 foreign fighters, at least 6,000 from the West, probably a lot more, have traveled to Syria or Iraq to fight with ISIL. They hail from more than 120 countries. Since the beginning of unrest in Syria in March 2011, the conflict has attracted approximately 250 U.S. persons, to include U.S. citizens, who have traveled or attempted to travel to Syria or Iraq, potentially to fight or otherwise support the conflict. More than 20 U.S. persons have been killed after traveling to participate. This just shows you, the main flows of foreign fighters from around the world. Here's a little bit of perspective as to the conflicts now as opposed to some other conflicts we've seen. 30,000 Sunni fighters from over 100 countries. Only 5,000 traveled to Afghanistan for the anti-Soviet fighting in the 80s. That is an amazing number. That is an amazing number. Only 5,000 traveled to Afghanistan for jihad against the Soviets in the 80s. 30,000 today. Only 4,000 jihadis went to the Iraqi battlefields between 2003 and 2007. ISIS controls 24 cities in Syria and Iraq and 70 miles of land along Turkey's border, and they have proceeds of $1 billion at least annually through extortion and taxation and other means. Why do young kids travel? Well, first of all, it's pretty accessible in today's day and age. There are well-known routes that you can get to Turkey, and once you get to Turkey, you can get into Syria and Iraq. It's easy to get there. You know, that sense of adventure that all young kids are looking for, kind of what we learned in that video. Some are actually looking for combat experience, but we hit upon it before, and a lot of you touched upon it. That number one thing, that sense of belonging, being part of the newly created Islamic State. That is so important. And the internet and social media have made that available. They have shown young kids that, hey, I have the opportunity to go be something better than I am, to join a group, to belong. Trends in U.S. travelers. What do approximately 250 U.S. persons who have traveled or attempted to travel to Syria or Iraq look like? Anybody? Well, they look like you, they look like me, they look like the gentleman in the back, they look like Sharon, they look like any of these young ladies. There is no discrimination. It is a wide, disparate group that is traveling to Syria. You can see by these pictures right here. They're male and female, and that's one thing that I wanted to touch upon. It's not just males that are traveling to Syria. It's not just males that we in the community have to continue to look out for. It's also females. Females have some of the same insecurities and some of the same desires that the young males have. So we have to look out for our young women as well. Young, as mentioned, inspired by ISIL's use of social media. They come from a variety of ethnic backgrounds. Traveled directly or indirectly to Turkey and made their way into Syria. Now predominantly they're joining ISIL. You've got other organizations like Nusra Front, but ISIL is the main organization that we're concerned about. U.S. examples, again, it's not one set of guys. They don't look one way. Very diverse. Next slide, please. All right, so in 2015, the FBI has arrested 62 young people who have provided material support to ISIL. You can see that this is a youth problem. 63% were between the ages of 15 and 25. All right, and let's go back to what I first said, and I'm going to keep re-emphasizing these points to the community. We've got radicalization, we've got mobilization. With radicalization, I hope that the community identifies those who have been radicalized, and they can divert that young person. That's my hope. If they mobilize, then we have to get involved. It's our job to get involved. So once again, remember, radicalization, mobilization. If you see anybody who is becoming radicalized or going down that radical path, please do what you can to divert them, whether it's a youth group, social group, parenting, it doesn't matter. But once they start mobilizing, then law enforcement gets involved. Next slide, please. It's just, yes, sir.
The question I have is, how do you differentiate being radicalized versus a person who becomes religious?
That's a very good question. And I mean, if we go back to the definition, I'll read it for you. Radicalization refers to the process by which individuals come to accept a violent extremist narrative and conclude that non-state violence and their participation in it is necessary and justified to affect political or societal change. And so if a person prays 5 times a day, is he radicalized? No, not at all. Absolutely not. But if a person starts to get more involved in the religion, it's not just Islam, I could say Christianity as well, but if they start to get more involved in their religion and they start to espouse violence, let's just take certain very far right-wing Christian groups. If they start to espouse violence against abortion clinics, they start to become radicalized. And by them saying, I disapprove of abortion clinics and I'm going to, and I think we should commit violence against them, that's radical. Once they take those overt steps to purchase materials to bomb an abortion clinic, well then that's mobilization. And that's the best way that I can define it. Yes, sir.
I can give an example. You know, I think you gave the abortion clinic. We had a Dr. Slepian here in Amherst who was murdered in his kitchen by someone who opposed family planning services. Now that's going to an extreme of radicalization. It's a violent extremism, that there was somebody based on faith that killed a physician performing services. Now, in my own practice of radicalization, I'm looking at, for example, ladies who don't use hijab, who don't use the head cover, and somebody coming out with a cane. You have to put a headscarf and start caning a woman. To me, that's a radicalization. That's a violent extremism, and that's what we need to guard against. An example of what may have been a part of a initial teaching of the faith is taken to an extreme where individual starts to own the entire faith. That is radicalization in my view, and that's something cannot be acceptable.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Dr. Kazi. Thank you for that. I will say, though, that my brothers in Saudi Arabia, the Mpac-Wny, they don't necessarily think the same way that I think. I have some funny stories about the Mpac-Wny, but that's for another time. All right, so this is an important slide. So as of June 2015, 30% of the arrests so far have been ISIS supporters who believe they could best serve the cause by carrying out attacks within the United States. And so you've got different categories. You've got that young 19, 20, 21-year-old kid who wants to travel to Syria to do something better. But then you've got this group, this 30%, who they can't travel, but they want to do something, and they want to do something here in the United States of America. Big problem. Next slide, please. These are just some examples of ISIS cases. This is open source information. You can find this on the internet. They're open ISIS supporters and investigations in all 50 states of the United States. 300 Americans are currently spreading ISIS propaganda through social media. Next slide, please. And just some more statistics on the threat. You can see that we here in Buffalo and Western New York, we're not immune to this. We just had 2 Rochester cases that I'm sure you heard about in the news. Once again, so you've got 79 arrests, 62 in 2015, a 300% increase. So yes, we're concerned about it. You should be concerned about it. We all should be concerned about those numbers. And we've already talked about it. You saw the propaganda, the video. Jihad is a personal obligation. Muslims have been humiliated. Islam will suffer the ultimate defeat. Reestablishing the caliphate is the ultimate goal of the Islamic faith. Those are basic propaganda tenets that you all know about. Next slide. More propaganda. Once again, Depew is Al Hayat news magazine. You can download this today. Challenges abound. There is no profile to point to for identifying potential travelers or extremists. We've talked about this before. There is no one profile. Because you've got a long beard doesn't mean you're an extremist. Because you're brown doesn't mean you're an extremist. It could be a white guy. There is no one profile. Radicalization becomes a personal process, and travel becomes undetectable. This is another thing that you and the community can look at. If whoever all of a sudden travels to Turkey, you may want to examine why they're traveling to Turkey. If you see other things that don't seem to be meshing up with this person's personality, or maybe they've had changes in their personality of late and all of a sudden they're traveling overseas, you may want to talk to their parents or their friends or their family. Again, change in behavior, weapons training, selling of possessions, travel arrangements, online communications with Syria or Iraq-based extremists. Parents, again, a common theme throughout. Know what your kids are looking at on the internet. Know what they're looking at on their cell phones. How are ISIS supporters being interdicted? 32 were caught because of social media posts and their online activity. 18 were turned in by somebody they know, a friend, family, teacher. 16 detected in connection with another active case. 7 discovered after they actually left the United States. 5 unknowingly contacted by or were in contact with an undercover FBI agent or informant. 3 turned in by a stranger. All right, last slide. Then we'll open it up to questions. Collaborative law enforcement approach to disrupting travel. We work with all of our state, local, and federal law enforcement organizations to look at that travel. What we've talked about time and time again here is monitoring social media of concern. Number one point, engaging with family and friends of the individual and having that good community support and good community communication. Intelligence analysts informing operations, that's our own operations, and then international cooperation with our partners in foreign countries. So with that, let's open it up. Let's have a good community discussion here. First question.
Can I start with a question?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So you talked about a lot of social media tools like Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, and all this, right?
Yes, sir.
So 90% or 99% of these things, probably the kids, I'm just speaking on behalf of the kids, they might go to these sites out of curiosity. They might have saw something, and then they could have clicked and might have shared something. Would they get tangled in your monitoring process or things like that? They end up somewhere. So should we warn that? Is there a message that has to be broadly sent out? Anything that you see in these regard, better stay out, because it's all at the fingertips. That's my main worry. And the second part is, of course, the radicalization part. How is that from the FBI and the source perspective, like specifically do's, don'ts, some of the best practices that you need to do? Is there something listed where the parents can go and then follow from a social media perspective specifically?
Two very good questions, sir, and I'll address the first one. For those of you who have heard me speak before, I want to emphasize one thing. We live in a great country. The United States has the Constitution of the United States of America. We have freedom of speech. You can download most things from the internet. That is not illegal. Quite frankly, if you mistakenly click on a link, I'm not going to investigate you. We don't have the time, we don't have the resources, and more importantly, it's against the Constitution. You know, you have that First Amendment right to read newspapers and read the news and the like. So don't be worried about that inadvertent click. Now, however, if we find, if for whatever reason, kids downloading that video and other ISIS videos, and we start to see patterns of communication and patterns of activity, then we're going to get involved. But again, you got to remember, the Constitution of the United States of America is a wonderful thing, and we are not going to infringe on that. And I'll let U.S. Attorney Hochul speak.
also gets into one of the limitations that I described in the government. We have the requirement to investigate crime, and as Mike said, crime in the U.S. Code really begins with mobilization. The other aspects, the radicalization phase, is really dependent, if we're going to counter it, on the community. And when it comes to social media, and I know, Rasul, you're in the IT world, IT experts will tell you need two things. You need volume and you need content. We need to compete in the social space with mass instances of positive messaging. But then you also, when it comes to content, have to match the passion that you see ISIS is bringing into this cyber battlefield. So that is an area where I think when Mike says we need the community's help, that's one example, because the limitations that the FBI brings is really just to investigate. It does not engage in the counter narrative. Is that right, Mike?
Thank you. Just a couple housekeeping before we move on to formal question and answer session. One, that those of you who did not complete that 5-question survey, please make sure to complete the survey before you leave. There are enough forms on the table outside. Second, there is also information on the table outside about 2 elements of what we're talking about tonight. One is in terms of FBI resource in relation to crimes against youth, and those crimes, whether they are cyber-based or otherwise. There is a very good resource for the parents. So it might be beneficial to keep a brochure at home in case of future reference, God forbid, if needed. And the third is that there is also, and that has been my sort of pitch with the law enforcement, is in terms of recruitment of Muslim community members in the law enforcement. So there is a brochure in terms of if anybody were interested in working for law enforcement at the federal level, and there is enough information about that also. With that, we have 3 experts to field your questions, and Zubairi Saab, after Fawad.
I think I want to commend, first of all, Mike and Amanda for your excellent presentation. Now, we are all trying to fight the battle against ISIS. There's no doubt about that. And whatever help we can get from any source is welcome. You're coming to us, Muslim community here, and you can see us, you know all of us, and we are there to help the government and help ourselves, actually. But there are passionate forces which are counteracting the positive message. And those negative messages is actually coming out from the politicians who are fighting the election battle in this cycle. And I'm not going to name them. You know all of them. I don't think that we should even name them. They're not worth naming. They are not helping us at all, and they are fighting the battle for ISIS. The question I have for you, as U.S. Attorney and FBI, are you talking to those guys and putting some sense in them? That what they are doing is not helping us.
So that's a very good question, sir. And I do cringe when I hear those comments. Though I cringe, I can't do anything about it. We live in the greatest country in the world. First Amendment free speech. And so I'll let U.S. Attorney Hochul speak to this, but we stay out of politics. We investigate the laws of the land. And so, I mentioned this in one of our last discussions with the Muslim community, that freedom of speech, that First Amendment that also that contains that freedom of the press, that's pretty important. And we don't want an FBI that goes out and intimidates the press or politicians, so we don't get involved in that, sir.
I think we'll benefit more from freedom of press than any other community.
And just to follow up with what Special Agent Tapin said, as a law enforcement officer, I can't get involved in politics either, which means I can't engage and refute comments that come from other elected officials. But there have been other elected officials who have condemned certain remarks made during the presidential campaign, and I'm married to one of them, as you may know.
Yeah, I have a question with Mike. As an American citizen, I want to know how the FBI works because I have some concern. Because as you said, radicalization followed by mobilization. And I have come to know of what you call FBI sting operation, in which you go in the community, find the radicals who cannot do anything, they have no means to bring violence, and you tell them, yeah, you can do some violence, and here are the bombs, here are the weapons, and then you grab them. So I don't agree with that kind of policy. Thank you.
Okay. I think I understand what you're talking about. First of all, I would never go in to any organization and say, oh yes, you can go do that. No, I'm not going to say that. I think what you're trying to communicate is entrapment. All right, so one of the things that we have to dispel here, and I've mentioned this in 3 other discussions with the community, entrapment is one thing, but somebody who has been mobilized and they are predisposed and they are going to commit a terrorist act, that's something completely different. And so I take offense to somebody who says that I am entrapping people in the community. Once again, we adhere to the Constitution of the United States of America. We will utilize every tool in our power to put bad guys in jail and protect you, the community. And if that means that I know that there is somebody who has been mobilized and he is going to commit an act, and the only way that I can prosecute him is to get his words on tape, yes, absolutely. I'm going to throw an undercover agent. I'm going to throw a source. I'm going to put somebody in front of him to have him talk about his methodologies for committing an act of terror or for providing material support to terrorists. It is a tool. It's a very useful tool. Unfortunately, in this community where there is so much talk and so much, I've seen it in Saudi Arabia and Jordan and all over the Middle East. It's many times it's cultures that they talk, and by the time it gets through 4 people, what actually happened is totally different. I know it. I've seen it, and I can tell you this right now, and I'll let U.S. Attorney Hochul speak to this. It's not as black and white as you mentioned it, sir. It's not like we went into a certain individual and said, yeah, go ahead, blow this up. That's not how it goes. I promise you that I have never, in 15 years, I have never seen an investigation like that. And with every investigation that there is a source or a confidential human informant or an undercover agent, the defense attorney always throws out entrapment. It's always their #1 defense. And by the time it gets out to the community, then it's, oh, the FBI is tricking that guy. But that's not the case.
No, that's an excellent answer. And just to maybe not spend much time on it, but legally, since I'm a lawyer, the FBI has requirements. They don't even engage or send in and use these tools like an undercover operative unless there's been evidence already of predisposition. Somebody somehow saying they want to hurt another human being. The moment it appears that there's somebody either within our community or outside our community who wants to use violence, at that point, our obligation is to engage. And one of the ways we engage, because the alternative is just to let the violence happen, and then you are speaking to the family of the person who's been murdered or other folks who have been hurt. the community is hurt whenever there's any kind of violence, and that's obvious. So when we have, the FBI has, now that's why I'm saying we, evidence of predisposition, somebody saying I want to hurt somebody, they then have the right under American law to see, is in fact the person just speaking, or do they really want to hurt somebody? And that's the purpose of the undercover or the source, if you will. Now here's the thing, once somebody gets arrested, if the defense wants to say they did not have predisposition, the whole crime was made up, they did not intend to commit a violation of the law, then it becomes the government's obligation at trial to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, not only that they committed these 5 elements of a crime, they intended to kill somebody, they took these steps, they bought the bomb or they bought the gun, whatever it may be. But then we also have to negate or disprove the defense that they were just talking. They didn't really intend to commit the crime. We have to defeat that at trial. And all 12 jurors have to agree. And if even one juror says, well, I think there was entrapment, we lose, the government being we, and the person walks out. So in my time, Mike said 15 years, in my time it's almost 30 years. I have had defendants claim at the time of arrest they were entrapped, or others claim, again, sometimes it's competing social media too. After an arrest, there are people that are putting out different narratives. Maybe somebody didn't have full mental capacity. Maybe they were coerced by the government. There's little strands, and you can see them in all kinds of trials or right after arrest. But then once you find out and you wait till the end and all the evidence comes out, if the person's convicted, that means all those competing strands were wrong. And it was the government that was right all along. And in 30 years, I've never had somebody that was entrapped. So
I think I just want to, specifically to your question, I was trying to find out if I can. We did. Mpac last year, Mpac has Courage Awards we give each year. Last year, the award was given to the Newburgh Sting. And Newburgh Sting was an operation of a sting operation from FBI that was made in the form of a documentary, small documentary. It was called the Newburgh Sting. On May 20th, 2009, 4 men from the largely African-American city of Newburgh were apprehended for an alleged terror plot. They had no history of violence or terrorist ties, but had been drawn by an FBI informant into a carefully orchestrated scheme to bomb Jewish synagogues in a wealthy New York City suburb and fire Stinger missiles at US military supply planes. So I think that's the type of example you are giving. These obviously are tested in a court of law. And I think that's probably what Mr. Hochul was saying, is that in his, sort of experience, he may not have seen it, but there is no question that these types of cases are, or examples, if not necessarily cases, send a very chilling effect in the Muslim community. And it is important for us all to realize that as long as we have open communication with our law enforcement, that is going to work far better, far superior than sting operations. Thank you. Next question.
Yeah. Do you have any data on those people who are sympathetic, already joined ISIS, about their real understanding of Islam, or how much they affiliated with the Muslim? Are they coming regularly, or they are just, overnight they become religious and go? Because my feeling is people regularly come. Normally I can't phantom, they are doing something like that. So I really don't know, because it's very difficult to understand where the radicalization happens. So what is the data you have about their real knowledge of Islam? Are they really involved in the masjid and they come to masjid regularly, or these are just?
No, sir. I mean, as we discussed in the presentation, there is no set. There are no set directions for identifying somebody who has gone from radicalization to immobilization. There's no time frame. There's no stereotype. It is as diverse as the young kid who shot up the movie theater in Denver, Colorado, to the Sandy Hook shootings, to the domestic terrorists that are out in Oregon. There is no set pattern for identifying somebody, and no rules in place. No, some never have been to mosque. Some are African American converts who converted in jail. Some never go to mosque in their community. They stay in their basement surfing the internet all the time. There's no. That's what makes this enemy so tough.
I think the classic example is of Boston Marathon bomber, Tsarnaevs. They were not a regular part of their community at all. And even one of the locals who has been arrested as a sympathizer for ISIS hasn't been seen near a mosque for at least 3 years, if not more. And the overall, Mpac has some national data. The impression is that a large number of such people are alienated from the mosque and the community. And in fact, it is to our advantage. It is to the benefit of the community and the country if they are affiliated with the mosque and the community, because then they are interconnected and they are connected with the people who are well-wishers of theirs as well as the community at large. So if there is an isolated wolf or somebody who abruptly drops from the community, it is our responsibility to make sure, reach out as to why that person abruptly disappeared from our community. That may be the biggest warning sign we have. If somebody in our community abruptly disappears and is still living in our community, it's a big red flag. Next.
Okay. Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. I have a question. ISIS was introduced to the whole world and is introduced to the world as an Islamic state, carrying the name of my religion. And a title in a presentation like this, ISIS in our own backyard. I mean, what is this supposed to do to my neighbor? What is this supposed to do to me when you say, if you tell somebody a criminal, I'm sure, I'm an FBI, I'm a responsible person, I'm authority, and I'm telling you a criminal in your backyard. How would they react? Am I now and on, I'm supposed to wear a t-shirt and say, I'm a Muslim, but I'm not in ISIS? Am I supposed to wear a scarf and say, well, I'm a Muslim, practice Islam, but I'm not in ISIS? I came here naive because I'm too busy to follow up the news and everything, and I'm leaving now in fear because I'm seeing ISIS in our backyard. Was I living in denial? So what's your comment on that? And what would my neighbor, where I have been living for 25 years now, think of me?
Okay, I think I want to make sure I understand the question. But before I answer, if I were in LA, I could have said Crips and Bloods in your backyard. Or if I were in Alabama, I could have said the Ku Klux Klan in your backyard. What we were trying to portray there is that social media and the internet has access to everybody in this room. And the fact that there have been 62 people who have been arrested and over 250 U.S. citizens who have traveled to Iraq and Syria to fight with ISIL shows that it's prevalent throughout the world, really. Not just in our society, but we all have to be aware of what our community is doing so that we can fix this problem. It was in no way was it meant to strike fear into your hearts. I'm sure that your neighbor is not an ISIL member. Okay, well, and that's a very good point too, and that's something that we as a community have to continue to do. We have to continue to reach out to our community and show them that people are people. Muslims are good people. That is something that we all have to strive as a community to do. By me providing that presentation, though, I hope that was not in any way made you fearful that I think that you are a member of ISIS or that you think that I am trying to convince others in the community to think that anybody here is ISIS. That was not the intent.
It highlights an important element of Muslim community psyche. If you remember, till 3 years ago, it used to be very common by government agencies and by the governments at the highest level, including the President of United States, use the term Islamic radicalism, right? This was one of Mpac projects for the last several years to make sure that Islamic terrorism is not used by the government officials. You can't control media, you can't control something else, but you can talk to your elected officials. And for the last 2 years, you have not seen the term Islamic terrorism used by the administration at all. And I want to give credit to the Muslim community across America that worked very hard to make sure that American administration does not use it. And the American administration does not use this term anymore. And I really want to give kudos to Mpac and others who worked hard for this. I think by the same token, we have to be sensitive as to what terminology we use, and it is applicable to the government employees because we pay them to do what they are supposed to do in terms of protecting us. Not to use the terms that can be misconstrued, that can be misused. And one of the terms that can be misused and misconstrued by our neighbors is if we start saying ISIS in our backyard, because that is most nonsensical term that we can use. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
I want to thank you for coming and doing a wonderful job over here. I think as a community, we need to realize that we do have a problem. The video that I watched, this is the first time I watched, my son has told me that, you know, you would not believe the kind of stuff they put it on. So first of all, we need to realize that in Islam, these people are using, the way the guy was talking about and then quoting the Quran and stuff or whatever, if we don't know our religion and if we don't teach our kids the proper, you know, the edit kits and the proper Quran and proper hadiths, that's where they're going to be a prey to these people. Secondly, when we say, and I want to answer my sister over here, when they say ISIS in your backyard, I've been living here for 27 years. My neighbors don't think I'm ISIS because they have known me before ISIS was born. ISIS was just born now. And we have been here for a long time. So if you have the personal relationships with the people and they have known you and they have grown with you, they will know what ISIS stands for and what we stand for. I think the question should be for our community right now is, what can we do to help you and what can you do to help us? Because I would rather have you investigate our youth than them going to that land over there where they're never going to come back. So I thank you for doing all that, and I think we need to trust our authorities, we need to trust FBI, we need to trust everybody in school, teachers, whoever, that if we, and then, you know, the way our community is, I would be very shocked if someone in my household or in my family doing something and I don't know. That's not the way we are. We want to know everyone's business anyway, so we should know what our kids are doing or our nieces, nephews, or whoever is coming to the mosque also. Like Dr. Qazi said, the person who drops out of the mosque, that's the person we should be going after and checking why they're not coming. Who are they having teas with, or who are they in the basement with someone? Thank you so much.
By way of a little more introduction, Yasmin's son, Khurram, is an attorney. And he has written some amazing, thought-provoking articles. The last one was published in Wall Street Journal last week in relation to the issues that community needs to look at as far as the radicalization is concerned. Thank you, Yasmin.
Thank you for coming also. But let me pose a question to the young lady because she feels alone by...
Shukran, Habibi.
I think that the bullying lead to these kind of situations that we find ourselves in. If they feel bullied and they isolate themselves and they get into the website and that's where the trouble lies. But perception is a big thing. Now, when somebody say there's a perception in certain communities about the FBI, the so-called entrapment, the encouragement by certain elements to individuals to go further than they might have, we don't know. But that's the perception. Might not be factual, it's a perception. So we have to really understand that. The question I have is there any sites, what is run by individual organizations or the government to combat the message of ISIS? Because if an individual, if everybody listened to the tape, but they didn't say, we want you to, bomb the West. We don't want you to overthrow anyone. They were saying, we want you to come to protect, the way of life, actually fight for Allah. So is there any sites that, that we as communities could go and say, you know what, it's a hidden message. Don't believe this. And if you don't believe me, look what happened in the past few months and years. The other point is when we have an individual arrested somewhere in a neighborhood, I agree with the sister over there that maybe the FBI really don't have any control over what the message by the media, but isn't there a way, that the hierarchy, for example, the FBI director, when he goes in front of the Congress for hearings, and you come to groups like this and we tell you the message that is coming out of individuals that are running for the highest office in the United States, the way they speak, and their promotion is, let's kick every Muslim out of here. I don't know if anybody watched the young lady that went to Trump gathering, and she stood up, and the crowd just want to stomp her if the securities didn't help her get out. So that was the message that some of these young guys see it and say, you know what, that's not right. And that will lead them to do something. So I appreciate that thing. But
yes, and I'll turn it over to Amanda in a little bit. But I think, first of all, the FBI Director Comey, has said on Capitol Hill many, many times, he says the same things that I say. And it has been stated throughout the leadership in the FBI that we depend on the Muslim community to keep us safe. And there is no place for anti-rhetoric like that. And I want to make one more point. Not only does the FBI investigate violent crime and terrorism, but we also investigate civil rights and civil liberties. And so we have done a very good job. We need to do a better job. But if anybody in this room feels as though their civil liberties have been violated, you need to come to us. We investigate that. That is one of our tenets. Usually when I do this, I bring one of our civil rights supervisors with me to discuss that aspect of what the FBI does to you. And so you may not have heard it, but everybody from the FBI director right on down to myself, anytime that we can, we trumpet as loud as we possibly can how vital the Muslim community is to the well function of our society. So
Amanda, Mohammed, in terms of what Donald Trump said, at the same time, I think we need to recognize that every single political leader in the House, in the Senate, whether it was Democrat or Republican, you take the majority leader in Senate, Mitch McConnell, or you take the Speaker of the House, a Republican, they admonished him and totally, demolished the base of his argument. So on the one hand, he's pandering to a certain group of people within our community, but on the other, we still need to recognize that, he was condemned by even the radical Republicans in that regard. Amanda?
Let me talk about the freedom of speech.
Well, I don't know that I can address a specific message that's going to tell people don't listen to this propaganda, but the wonderful thing about freedom of speech is that we all have it. But if we don't want others to listen to all the negative messages, then it becomes our job to put out the other messages, the more positive messages. So in the bullying world, there's kind of two approaches. There's this is bullying, it's wrong, don't do this. There's a whole movement that's saying, well, what do we want people to do? What is the message that we want to send? So at the Alberti Center, we have a whole YouTube channel it's not about ISIS, anti-ISIS, it's about how are we celebrating differences, how are we standing up when we see injustices, what can we do in a positive way to not be a bystander. We actually do an event at UB that involves area high schools it's called Band Against Bullying, and they come and do a performing arts competition. And last year, some of it, people stood up and did artistic things. They said, I'm not a terrorist. I'm not an anorexic. Don't call me these things. Let's stand together. They, held hands together. So I'm not saying but I think the more that we as communities and as people try to put out a positive message about what we're doing, how we're working together, how we're trying to do some positive things, it's those relationships, it's those connections, it's that exposure to you as a peaceful, good person that is going to do as much as we can to counter, because we can't take down every YouTube site. We can't stop Donald Trump from talking. Oh, sorry. And a lot of people, but where's our voice? And I think that's something that each of us can do, even in the midst of hearing about these very fearful and scary things. We need to take some of the power back as well in a positive way.
Thank you. In a way, you have answered my question about sites and putting down YouTube videos. My question is that how come those videos or the person who uploads that video, right away FBI is not doing something about it? And because I feel that they are the ones that putting out there. My kids, they don't know Islam, and it's they might have a question and go to the site, but as the sister said, I really have to be on top of it, especially when I saw the video, I was shocked. So.
Well, it's very hard for the government to interfere, and we can't interfere with anybody's speech or practice of religion. So even if somebody espouses a group such as ISIS, we can't restrain speech. So that's one of the limitations. Probably there's technical ones too as to how you would get the producers right?
Sure. No, are you talking about bullying? Oh, the videos. Yeah, okay. That's a. All right, so I'll give you a quick story. So I went back to San Francisco with several Saudi generals and princes. Because as you can imagine, the threats that we see here in the United States are nothing compared to what the Saudis are seeing. They have real problems. They have our problems multiplied by 1,000. And the Twitter problem is huge in Saudi Arabia. And so I took back several generals and princes, and we met with the executives at Twitter. And Twitter was very open-minded. But we had a very open dialogue about free speech, which the Saudis didn't, they had a hard time with free speech. But more importantly, even Twitter said, hey, listen, we'll see something like that, and on one day we'll have one law enforcement organization say, take that down, and they'll take it down. The next day, they'll have another law enforcement organization like the FBI say, keep it up. We want it up because we want to monitor it, because we want to find out who's putting that on. So cyberspace is very complex. And there is so much out there, and there is so limited resources, and there are so many different competing interests. And you throw in, U.S. civil liberties in the Constitution. It makes it very, very, very complex. And so it goes back to community. If the community sees something and they bring it to us, we'll open up a case and we'll say, hey, what can we do to combat this? And I'll go to whatever servers and say, hey, what can we do to take this down, or what can we do to identify people who are posting to it? But it's a very, very complex situation. Cyberspace is complex.
And to just reinforce Amanda's point, if individuals put their own competing YouTube videos where things aren't as ISIS portrays, that would have a very positive potential impact to get the other narrative out, and then retweet it. You can fight fire with fire. The government has limitations, but non-government organizations and individuals don't have the limitations in some of these areas that the government has. It would be nice if someday a defector, just to use one example, came forward and said, I went overseas and I can tell you I was promised the stars, and when I got there was nothing like it. It was terrible. A message like that, a defector or somebody who is no longer following what got them over there, that would be powerful, I would think, too.
Can I just mention one thing about social media? It's not about ISIS again, but Facebook, other social media applications do have places where you can report abuse. So just for you to know and for you to educate your kids, like if somebody's being bullied, you can report that. If you are concerned about something that somebody's saying, as in you think that they're going to try to kill themselves or they're making suicidal comments, you can also report that, and they're linked up with Suicide Lifeline to get help. So I think it's very difficult to take these things down, but even social media sites are trying to get proactive about there's so much out there, and we could actually be helping people. So I just want to make people aware.
We are getting to the close of the time because we had persuaded our speakers to be here up to 8 o'clock, and it is 8 o'clock. If you have a hard comment.
There's going to be a very interesting program on 7th of February at Westminster Presbyterian. And it will be a book discussion written by a former terrorist, part of a big Muslim Brotherhood, and how he turned around. And that's a conversation between an atheist and Muhammad Nawaz, who wrote that book. I think it's going to be a great program, and anybody who is interested can attend that session at Westminster Presbyterian Church on 7th of February.
Thank you. I'm coming. Just for your information, Mpac this is the 15th annual Understanding Islam series going on with Westminster, and we devote the month of February to Understanding Islam series. And this year, the first presentation, as Fawad mentioned, on February 7th at 9:30 in the morning at Westminster Presbyterian Church, 742 Delaware Avenue. It's a book review. And the book is written, which is actually a conversation between two people. One, an atheist who's radical in his own way, and somebody who was an active member of ISIS, who left ISIS and transformed himself and formed an organization against ISIS in England. So it's a conversation. His name is Majid and Harris. So it's a very unique conversation, and we have invited Professor Gokchek from Niagara University to moderate that discussion this Sunday, next coming up Sunday, week from today at 9:30 at Westminster Presbyterian, if you are interested. Last question.
Okay, I'd like to thank you for coming, and I'd like to add what Sister Yasmin said a bit earlier. I think I'm combining the bullying and the ISIS in our backyard part, where like nowadays in high school, people might be backing away from like talking less to Muslims because of maybe being afraid or something. And I think it's just like, as like a youth group, or our role in high school is that we should show them that we are not ISIS at all, and that we have nothing to do with them. We're different, we're nice, we're polite, we're exactly like them, and that they shouldn't be afraid of us. And I think that like people talk a lot, and by us just showing them that this happens, that one by one we'll all be together, and that there won't be like any problems or any Twitter fights that I see always. And like, I think that's just like, I don't know, that we should just all, we should show them that we're not like ISIS at all.
That's the best way to close it. Thank you very much. And I want to call Imam Khalil up to the podium to make a dua for us, to give a benediction. And while he's coming up, don't forget Mpac. Mpac Foundation is 100% tax exempt, and we need your financial help as much as possible. So make donations to Mpac Foundation. And Imam Khalil.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would like to thank all of our guests for taking out their time, as well as Mpac for organizing this event, and as well as the community for coming and showing up for this event. I think this evening was a very wonderful event, and the program was very nice, and the food was very nice as well, along with the desserts. So I think this whole issue is something which is disturbing all of us, and it's time for us to stand up and actually work towards the change. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability and the strength and the qualities to stand up for that which is right and justice. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us all towards the right path. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive our shortcomings. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. We can proceed towards salah.
Thank you again, everyone. We stand adjourned.